Over the past few weeks, the state pension has made history, with a critical change to the amount that we're going to get paid. And unfortunately, it's not for the good. We're now technically worse off than we should be. It exposes a huge flaw in the state pension and shows how it could turn into a real problem. But before we dive into the details on what has gone down and what you should do about it, let's first remind ourselves of how the state pension works. The state pension is a type of pension that UK taxpayers can claim when they retire, to give some form of stable income during retirement. The age that you can start to claim it depends on when you were born. You can use this tool on the government's website to see what your state pension age is, but it will be somewhere between 65 and 68. You qualify for the state pension by making national insurance contributions, and you'll need 35 full years of contributions to qualify for the full amount. If you have qualified for the full amount, then you'll currently receive £179.50 per week, or £9,364 per year. The reason why I say that this is what you'll currently receive is because the state pension payouts increase each year, in line with what is known as the triple lock system. The triple lock system essentially guarantees that state pension payouts will increase by a fair amount each year. It was introduced in 2010. It means that you get an increase in payments that is equal to the largest of three variables. These are inflation, the average wage growth, or 2.5%. Unfortunately for us, this is where the state pension made a change for the worse. They broke the triple lock system. Let's have a look at this year's numbers. So bear in mind that we are guaranteed a 2.5% increase no matter what. So that's already locked in. The next factor is inflation, which was finalised in September and was locked in at 3.1%. So this beats the 2.5% that we had before. The next factor is average wage growth, which clocked in at a whopping 8%. But this is where the government stepped in. The problem is that the average wage growth was artificially high as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The British people have started to come off of their furlough schemes and return to full pay, which explains the huge spike in average wage growth that we've seen. To combat this, the government temporarily suspended the triple lock system, meaning that we'll get an increase of 3.1% this year, not 8%. The House of Lords actually voted to overturn this suspension of the triple lock system, but this is expected to be overturned in the House of Commons, where the government will have a comfortable majority. Now, I don't want to get involved in the politics of it all, but from an objective standpoint, people are looking at this whole situation in two different ways. Some people, including the government, think that it's fair enough. The wage growth was artificially high, so it's not really a true reflection of what the state pension should increase by. Besides, an increase of 8% would cost the government around £5 billion, which is going to be pretty tough to handle, especially considering that we're already trying to pay back the debts from the pandemic. On the other side of the table, people are fuming. How can the government overturn a triple lock system that is literally put in place to protect the state pension and ensure that we get paid a fair amount? Inflation was at 3.1% in September, but by early next year it could rise to as high as 5%. So by the time that the state pension payouts increase in April, we could turn out to be 1.9% worse off. Ros Altman in the House of Lords also argued that this suspension is going to hit the poorest pensioners the hardest, which makes sense. It's not going to affect rich people who already have a ton of money in the private pension, but for people who are poor and actually rely on the state pension, it's going to be tough. Another argument is that if the government can just break the triple lock so easy, what else can we do? This is especially worrying when you consider that the state pension is becoming more and more unsustainable. When the state pension was first introduced in 1946, the average male life expectancy was 63, but now it's at 80. This means that the cost of a state pension is generally always increasing, as we've got an increased number of older people who have earned the state pension, so that's more people to pay. We could eventually reach a point where we literally cannot keep up with the payments, as the national insurance contributions from our workers won't be enough. This data is from the government, and it shows the National Insurance Fund amount for 2019 and 2020. The amounts are in thousands. You can see that for both years, there was actually a surplus of payments, meaning that we saved more in national insurance contributions than we had to pay out in the state pension. If we scroll down, we can see that the closing balance for 2020 was a surplus of almost £37 billion. Now, this seems like a positive thing. We're saving more and our surplus is increasing. What could go wrong? Well, Sir Steve Webb, former pensions minister, argues that this surplus amount is meaningless. It's the difference between two large and volatile numbers. On the revenue side, it depends on the health of the economy, the number of people in work, the level of wages, etc. On the spending side, it depends mainly on the pension figure and partly on the rate of unemployment. To be fair, he makes a good point. If unemployment rises or wage growth starts to stagnate, then our national insurance contributions as a nation could decrease, whilst the state pension payouts will almost always increase. In conclusion, it's fair to say that there is a lot of concern that the state pension won't be around forever. or at least that it will be decreased significantly at some point. After seeing how easily the government can change plans, it's pretty understandable. Another point that you could make is that the state pension just isn't enough as it stands. The amount is just too low. The current amount equates to around £9,360, but this graph from Which shows some different retirement income targets. The categories are separated as essential, comfortable, or luxury, depending on what you're after when you retire. Either way, you can see that the essential category falls between £13,000 and £18,000, meaning the state pension alone probably won't cut it. But instead of moping around and complaining about how it was easier for the previous generation, let's take some action. What can we do to counter the risk of the state pension collapsing? Well, the key is to ensure that we build up enough of an income during retirement such that we can sustain a good standard of living without relying on the state pension. There's a few different ways that we can do this. But an obvious place to start for most people is by sorting out our private pensions. If you're over 22 and earn over £10,000 from a single job, then you've probably already been auto-enrolled into your company's private pension scheme. The minimum contribution is 8% of your salary, but a minimum of 3% of this has to be made up by your employer. So make sure you're enrolled, because this 3% is literally free money. Some employers will even match your contributions up to a higher percentage. All you have to do is ask. Simply send an email to HR. It's quick, easy to do, and it could save you thousands of pounds in the long run. Yo, Sue, what is the maximum amount you will match my pension contributions to? Cheers. Now, you can change the wording a little if you want, but it really is that easy. Remember that the more they contribute, the more free money you get. Even if your employer won't contribute more than 3%, there's nothing from stopping you from contributing more than the standard 5%. Again, all you have to do is send an email. Saving money in a pension is a great way to do it because it's gone from your payslip and it's like you never even realised it disappeared. But it's still being put to good use. Well, it could be put to good use, which leads us right onto our next point. Check what your private pension is invested in. For whatever reason, most people treat pensions like they don't exist. They might watch my videos on the best fund to put in a stocks and shares ISA, but they forget about the pension. By creating an account with your pension provider, you can gain more control over your investments and select a fund that actually suits you instead of being lumped in the default funds. I'd recommend that everybody checks this with both your current and old pensions, because some of the default funds that you get put into are high fees and it's unlikely that it's going to match the equity bond allocation that you actually want. It's 10 to 15 minutes of work, maybe an application form or two, but it could save you thousands in the long run. Just do it. Don't binge watch YouTube tonight. Get it done. It's worth mentioning that I've mainly just been talking about defined contribution private pensions, but if you have a defined benefit one, then take advantage of that too. Defined benefit pensions are often very lucrative. Opting out could be a very serious mistake, so don't take the decision lightly. Whilst it may be nice to see some extra money in your pay every month by opting out of your pension, you're not going to care about that when you're retired and you haven't saved anything. The next option that we have is to invest in a self-invested personal pension. In many ways, this is very similar to private pensions, but you generally have a little more control over your investments. Any contributions that you make will get a boost from the government, depending on your income tax rate at that time. You can kind of think of it as a bit of tax relief for investing in a pension. Alternatively, you could invest long term in a stocks and shares ISA, which has different advantages and disadvantages when compared to a SIPP. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on these two approaches because that was a topic of last week's video, so watch that if you need a refresher. So whether you choose to increase your private pension contributions, invest in a SIPP, or even a stocks and shares ISA, the next step is to turn those investments into income during retirement. Vanguard suggests that the best way to do this is to focus on a total return investing approach, as opposed to the more traditional income investing approach. I have covered this before, so I'll make it quick, I promise. Typically, investors approaching retirement would either increase their allocation to fixed income or dividend-paying stocks. However, the yield on these investments have fallen over time. This graph from a Vanguard article shows the yield of different asset classes over the past 30 years. All of the asset classes have seen a significant fall in yield, with the average value being around 2% now, despite most retirees aiming to live off of 4%. Instead, if investors were to focus on a total return investing approach where you stay invested in a standard portfolio and just sell your assets for capital gains, the results could be more positive. You have more control over diversification as you are not focusing on income assets only, you can have increased tax efficiency, and you have more control over the size and timings of your portfolio withdrawals. If you can combine this total return investing approach with the investments that you've made in either your private pension, your personal pension, or your stocks and shares ISA, then you'll be in good hands. But whichever approach you choose to go for, the key is to take action early. We've seen recently that the state pension might not be as stable and secure as you would expect, and we probably need to prepare for the worst when it comes to retirement savings. But even if the state pension is under threat, that doesn't mean that your retirement needs to be under threat too. We are in control of what our income will be during retirement. We don't just have to rely on the payments from the state pension to get us through. By investing consistently in our private pensions, SIPs, or stocks and shares ISAs, we'll be well on our way to securing ourselves a financially secure retirement. Now, if you do want a bit more information when it comes to choosing between a stocks and shares ISA or a SIP, then I'd recommend that you watch last week's video, where we break down the key differences and we even do a fully simulated investing scenario to see which type of account comes out on top. And with that, we'll leave it there. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.